Good evening and welcome back to Channel 514 and SPK Plus for another episode in our series Exploring Ancient Literature as we continue to explore Egyptian literature. And if you remember, in our last presentation we began studying the classics of the Middle Kingdom, which corresponds roughly with the first half of the second millennium BC. The dates more specifically are usually put as circa 2055 to circa 1650 BC. So, last time we read, or we discussed, the tale of the eloquent peasant and the tale of the shipwrecked sailor, and also that of Khufu and the magicians. But this time what we're going to do is start on the tale of Sinuhe. Now, before I say much more about it, I'll just inform you that this time we're going to actually read the text itself all the way through, and because it runs to about 10 pages in the volume that we usually use, The Literature of Ancient Egypt, from Yale University Press, what we're going to do is stop about halfway through if it seems to be getting pretty long. So probably this will take 2 videos, but in any case, I just wanted to make that clear first before we get into this, that we'll be reading the whole thing and not just summarizing it, because actually I haven't read it myself in about 10 years or so, and so there's a good chance, maybe even more than that, but probably about that long, so there's a good chance that I would garble it or trip over things trying to just summarize it off the top of my head. And it's worth actually reading the whole thing because it's not forbiddingly long, prohibitively long, and it's one of the more important things in Egyptian literature. So now I will describe it just a little bit before we get into it, but one thing that's important to realize is that this text, although one doesn't hear anything about it in popular culture, it's really well, you might say it's the Gilgamesh of ancient Egypt, or it's the Iliad and Odyssey of ancient Egypt, so it's the great epic of the Middle Kingdom. And just before beginning this, I searched for it on YouTube, and what did I find? Well, not very much, except one video presentation that was made in a sort of book report style by some high school kids or college kids, which all that is fine and can be entertaining, but it's not any substitute for actually reading the thing. And then there are a lot of clips from this movie from 1954 called The Egyptian, which is sort of a sword and sandal movie with Gene Simmons and Peter Ustinov and these celebrities from that time period. But the plot of that movie, which I looked up on Wikipedia, doesn't have anything to do, as far as I can tell, with our story that we're going to read. So one thing that I think is interesting about this text, and that makes it particularly fresh and new to Western readers, is that it is pretty much untouched by the dirty colonial and post-colonial hand of the English-speaking world. So you don't have any of this malignantly romantic interest or this baggage attached to the text that would be associated with Western occultism or the New Age movement or with Egyptomania or any of these sort of decadent phenomena or movements or cultural expressions in the Western world, and especially the English-speaking world. So So this is something new. We can read it without any preconceptions or without any undue influence from popular culture, and instead we can simply get much closer than usual to what the actual ancient authors had in mind and get a sense of what this meant to people in ancient Egypt, where this was, it should be noted, one of the most influential or one of the most beloved and celebrated works of literature. So, having said that, I'm going to read a little bit from the introduction that our translator gives in our book here. The translator this time is William Kelly Simpson, the editor of the book. So let's see what he has to say. He says, "The story of Sinuhe was once regarded as a more or less factual account of the adventures of an Egyptian courtier copied from an inscription in his tomb. No trace of a real Sinuhe, however, has been found through tomb reliefs, statuary, or stelae. The story is a literary narrative. Given its development, the psychology of the protagonist, the use of language, and the picture of the times in Syria and Palestine. Sinuhe is a resourceful man of his times, a prototype of the proper official at a time of rising prosperity in Egypt and its relations abroad." So, we'll skip a little. The story begins with the death of the founder of Dynasty 12, Amenemhet I, and the report of his death made to the army headed by his son, co-regent, and successor, Senwosret I. The treatment of the latter in the story is propagandistic. So, with the exception of religious texts and various standard formulas, few other compositions are represented in as many copies or partial copies. 2 papyri of Dynasties 12 and 13 provide a fairly complete text. In the Ramesside period in Dynasties 19 and 20, master scribes and their students copied the text in school on limestone flakes, ostraka. One of these has virtually the whole text inscribed on both sides of a large flake, and here he cites a source, J.W. Barnes, the Ashmolean Ostrakon of Sinuhe, Oxford, 1952. And then he notes that the chapter headings that I'll read before each section of the text are not, of course, in the original text. There's something he's added. So, anyway, as he says, this was such an important text in ancient Egypt and so popular and celebrated that they copied it in school on ostraka, on limestone flakes. The word ostrakon or ostraka in Greek means a potsherd, a piece of broken pottery, but in this case it's a piece of limestone. So he also doesn't venture a guess as to when the text was written, but we can see that we have copies from the 12th dynasty, and it gives a treatment of the founder of the 12th dynasty and his successor that can be described as propagandistic. So most likely it dates to the 12th dynasty. Now, he also notes, I skipped this, but now I think I'll read it. Talking about the main character, Sinuhe, he says, "Impelled by some inner force he cannot explain, to flee from the court, he makes his own way and recognizes later both the necessity to return to his king and the advantage of a traditional burial and funerary rites." So, in a way, the text celebrates Egyptian civilization as the only civilization, or the supreme civilization, because the main character is sort of an emigre who flees the land in a time of succession, in a time when one king has died and another king is taking over, and for some reason he probably fears the new king and he flees and becomes prosperous and powerful in the Levant, but he decides ultimately to return to Egypt and to be buried there and to throw himself upon the mercies of the the reigning king, because to him that's really the right thing to do and the only proper way for a civilized man to live. And so an Egyptian official flees from Egypt and comes home, and that's really what our story is about here. And without saying anything more, I think we'll just get right into reading. So this runs to about 11 pages, so I'll go until maybe we get to a half hour or so, or 25 minutes or so, and I'll cut it off and start a second video. So, the Tale of Sinuhe, beginning. Now there's an introduction. So, the hereditary noble and commander, warden and district officer of the estates of the sovereign in the lands of the Asiatics, this truly beloved royal acquaintance, the follower Sinuhe, said, I was a follower who followed his lord, a servant of the king's harem and of the hereditary princess, greatest of praise, wife of King Senwosret in Knumet-Sut, and daughter of King Amenemhet in Ka-Nofru, Nofru, the possessor of an honored state. And now, death of Amenemhet I and Sinuhe's flight. Year 30, month 3 of Akhet, day 7. The god ascended to his horizon, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehet-Epibre. He penetrated the sky, being joined to the sun disk, the god's body being mixed with that of him who made him. The capital was silent, desires were weak, the great double gate was locked, the court was with head upon knee, and the nobles were mourning. Now his majesty had dispatched an expeditionary force to the land of the Jemehi, with his eldest son as its leader, the good god Senwosret. He had been sent to strike the foreign lands and to smite those who were among the Jehenu people. And now he was returning, having brought back captives of the Jehenu people and all kinds of cattle without number. The companions of the palace sent to the western half to inform the king's son of the affairs which had taken place in the council chamber. When the messengers found him upon the road and reached him at dusk, he did not delay for a moment. The falcon flew off with his followers, without letting his expeditionary force know it. Now they had written to the sons of the king who were in his following in this expeditionary force. When it was being read out to one of them, I was standing by, and I heard his voice as he spoke, being in the vicinity of a conspiracy. My senses were disturbed, my arms spread out, and trembling came over every part of me. I took myself off by bounds to find for myself a place of concealment. I placed myself between two shrubs in order to separate the road from its traveler. I went south. I did not plan to reach the capital, for I anticipated riots might occur, and I would not be able to say life after him, the king. I crossed the place called the Two Truths in the vicinity of the sycamore, and I landed at the island of Snefru. I waited at the edge of the cultivation. I set forth at daybreak, and I came upon a man standing in the middle of the road. He greeted me respectfully, for he was frightened. When the time of the evening meal came, I arrived at the wharf of Negao. It was with the help of the west wind that I crossed over in a boat without a rudder. I passed by to the east of the quarry, above the mistress of the Red Mountain, that is, the opposite side of the river, beyond the cultivation, in the desert, and I gave a path to my feet northward until I touched the walls of the prince, which had been made to check the Asiatics and to crush the sand travelers. I took a crouched position in the brush, out of fear that the guard on duty on the walls might see. I went by night, and when day came I had reached Peten. I alighted at the island of Kemwer. Thirst overcame me, and it hastened me on. I was parched, my throat dry, and I said, This is the taste of death. But I raised up my heart and gathered together my limbs. I heard the sound of the lowing of cattle, and I looked upon Asiatics. Their Bedouin chief recognized me, a man who had been in Egypt. He gave me water and boiled milk for me, and I went with him to his tribe, and what they did for me was good. One land gave me to another land. I set out for Byblos, near Beirut, and I returned to Kedem. I spent half a year there. It was Amusinenshi who brought me back. He was the chief of Upper Retenu. He said to me, "You will be well with me, for you will hear the speech of Egypt." He said this, for he knew my reputation. He had heard of my intelligence, for the people of Egypt who were there with him bore witness to me. Then he said to me, "Why have you come here? Has anything happened at the capital?" Then I said to him, "The king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Sehetepibre, has proceeded to the horizon, and no one knows what may happen because of this." But I then spoke equivocally. When I returned from an expedition in the land of the Jemehu, one announced that to me. My mind vacillated. My heart was not in my body, and it brought me to the ways of flight. But no one accused me. No one spat in my face. No reproach was heard, and my name was not heard in the mouth of the town crier. I do not know what brought me to this land. It was like the plan of a god. He said to me, well, now we're starting a new part of our story. Praise of Senwosret the First. So up to this point you can see Sinuhe flees the land because he's worried that the way he has talked about what's happened, about the death of Amenemhet I, to this official, the chief of Upper Retenu, which is, it says here in the footnote, a designation for part of Palestine and Syria. So he's worried about what he said and if that's going to be maybe taken in the wrong way, it seems, and so he flees. But he emphasizes that his mind vacillated and that no one really compelled him to flee and no one informed against him or brought an accusation against him. So anyway, on to the next part, praise of Senwosret the First. He said to me, "How shall that land fare without him, that efficient god, the awe of whom is throughout the foreign lands like Sachmet in a year of pestilence?" I said to him so that I might answer him, "To be certain, his son has entered the palace and has taken over the inheritance of his father. He is a god indeed, without peer. No other being came into being before him. He is a master of knowledge, excellent in planning, and efficient in commanding, one by whose command one comes forth and goes down. It was he who controlled the foreign lands while his father was in his palace. He reported to him what he, the father, decreed had come to happen. He is a champion who acts with his scimitar, a fighter without anyone like him when he is seen attacking the bowmen and engaging the fray. He is one who bends back the horn and renders hands powerless, so that his enemies cannot muster their ranks. He is vengeful when he cracks skulls, and no one can stand up to him. He steps wide when he annihilates the fugitive. There is no success for the one who shows his back to him. He is adamant at the moment of contact. He comes again, and does not show his back. He is stalwart of heart when he sees a crowd, and he does not allow cowardice around him. He is eager when he falls upon the retinue, and he is joyful when he plunders the bow people. As soon as he takes up his shield, he strikes down. He need not repeat the act of killing, for there is no one who can deflect his arrow, nor one who can draw his bow. The bowmen retreat before him as if before the might of the great goddess. He fights on, having foreseen the outcome, and he takes no care for the remnants. But he is well favored, and very gentle. Through love he takes. His city desires him more than herself, and they rejoice because of him more than for their God. Now that he is king, husbands and wives rejoice because of him. While still in the egg, he conquered, and his face was set to it from birth. It is he who has enriched those born with him, for he is one whom God has given. How joyful is this land now that he has reigned! He is one to extend borders. He has vanquished the southlands, and he will not even have to think about the northlands, for he was made to smite the Asiatics and crush the sand-crossers. Write to him, and let him know your name. Do not utter sedition against his majesty, for he will do for you that which his father did, and he will not fail to do good to a foreign land which is loyal to him." So you can see, that's probably, I'm sure actually, we're all sure by this point probably, that that's the part of our story that the translator refers to as propagandistic. So it's a praise at some length. of Senwosret the first, the second king in the 12th dynasty. So now we go on to a section that our translator calls Sinuhe in Palestine. So he's fled from Egypt and he's going into Palestine. And then he said to me, "Indeed, Egypt is fortunate, now that she knows that he flourishes. You are here, and you shall be with me, and what I shall do for you will be good." He placed me in front of his children, and he married me to, literally moored me to, his eldest daughter. He allowed me to pick from his country the choicest part of what he owned on his border with another country. It was a wonderful land called Ya. There were cultivated figs in it, and grapes, and more wine than water. Its honey was abundant, and its olive trees numerous. On its trees were all varieties of fruit. There were barley and emmer, and there was no end to all varieties of cattle. That which fell to my lot as a favored one was great. He set me up as chief of a tribe of the finest in his land. I obtained rations as daily disbursements, and wine as a daily requirement, cooked meat and roasted fowl, beside the desert game. They hunted for me, and they set food down before me, in addition to the catch of my hunting dogs. They made for me many sweet things, with milk and everything cooked. I spent many years, while my offspring became strong men, each man managing his own tribe. The messenger who came north and went south to the capital stayed with me, and I made all Egyptians stay. I gave water to the thirsty man, and I put the wanderer back on the road. I rescued the man who was robbed. When the Asiatics began to stir and to oppose the authority of the chiefs of the foreign lands, I counseled their marches. This ruler of Retenu had me spend many years as an officer of his troops. As to any land which I left, when I had made my attack, it was driven off from its cultivation and wells. When I had plundered its cattle and brought back its inhabitants, and their produce was taken, I killed the people in it by my strong arm, my bow, my maneuvers, and my efficient advice. It went well with me in his favor, for he loved me and he recognized my bravery. He placed me at the head of his offspring when he saw my arms grow so strong. So apparently our hero is flourishing in Palestine. He's become a powerful associate of the chief of the district. And so he wins victories and raises a family, and much of the good things of the land are afforded to him as tribute. And so he's doing very well. But of course we know that he's going to realize that he's in the wrong place and living the wrong kind of life, and that it's just wrong and he has to go home. So this next section is referred to as the combat. So there came a strong man of Retenu to challenge me at my tent. He was a champion without equal, and he had subdued all of it. He said that he would fight with me, for he thought to ruin me. He planned to plunder my cattle at the urging of his tribe. But that chief consulted with me, and I said, I did not know him. I am not a confederate of his that I could stride about in his camp. Had it ever happened that I entered his women's rooms, or have I scaled his walls? It is ill will, for he sees me carrying out your affairs. I am like a bull of a grazing herd in the midst of another herd. The bull of the kine attacks him, but the Egyptian bull prevails against him. Is a subject loved when he acts the master? There is no foreign bowman who is an ally of a delta man. What is it that can join a papyrus plant to a rock? Does a bull wish to fight? Then a champion bull will wish to retreat through fear of one who might equal him. But if his intention is to fight, let him say what he wants. Is God ignorant of what he has ordained, knowing as he does how the matter stands? I spent the night stretching my bow, and I shot my arrows. I gave an edge to my dagger, and I polished my weapons. When daybreak came, Retenu had come. It had urged on its tribes, and it had collected the lands of both its halves. It had intended this combat. He, the strong man, came out to me where I was waiting, and I placed myself near him. Every heart burned for me. Wives and husbands yelled. Every heart ached for me, saying, Is there another strong man who could fight against him? His shield, his axe, and his armful of javelins fell to me. After I had escaped his weapons, I made his remaining arrows pass by me, and not one was left over. Then he let out a yell, for he thought to ruin me, and he approached me. I shot him, my arrow fixed in his neck. He shouted, and fell upon his nose. I felled him with his own axe. I yelled my war cry over his back. Every Asiatic yelped. I gave praise to Montu, while his adherents mourned for him. This ruler, Amusinenshi, took me in his arms, and he kissed me in my clasp. I brought away his possessions. I seized his cattle. What he had thought to do to me, I did to him. I took away what was in his tent. I stripped his camp, and it was abundant for me therein. I became rich in treasure, a great proprietor of cattle. God acts in such a way to be merciful to one whom he had blamed, one whom he led astray to another land. For today his heart is appeased. A fugitive fled because of his situation, but my renown is in the capital. A wanderer wandered through hunger, but I give bread to my neighbor. Through nakedness a man departed from his land, but I have white clothes and fine linen. A man hurried for lack of someone to send, but I have many servants. My house is fine, and my dwelling place is wide. The thought of me is in the palace. So he defeats this champion of the land where he's been dwelling, and he's even more eminent and more renowned after this. And so Sinuhe, in exile, is at the height of his powers and the height of his success, and it seems that there is nothing lacking to him. But lo and behold, our next section is called What Else But Sinuhe Wishes to Return to Egypt. So, O God, whoever you are, who decreed this flight, may you be merciful, and may you set me in the capital. Perhaps you will let me see the place where my desire lives. What can be more important than joining my dead body to the land where I was born? Come, help me. May a good solution come to pass. May God give me satisfaction. May he act similarly to better the end of one whom he had made miserable, and be concerned about one whom he had shunted off to live in a foreign land. If today he is merciful, and he hearkens to the prayer of a man far off, may he change my region whence I roamed the earth for him, to the place from which he brought me. May the king of Egypt be merciful to me, and may I live on his bounty. May I greet the mistress of the land who is in his palace, and may I attend to the errands of her children. My body will be youthful again, for old age has come down on me, and feebleness has hurried upon me. My eyes are heavy, and my arms are immobile. My feet fail to proceed, and my senses are exhausted. I am near to passing on, when they shall send me to the cities of eternity. But may I still serve the mistress of all, that she may say something good for me to her children. May she pass eternity above me. Now, this report was made to His Majesty the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Kheper-Kare, who will be judged right, concerning this state in which I was. His Majesty sent to me with provisions of the royal bounty. He rejoiced the heart of this servant as might be done for a ruler of a foreign land, and the king's children who were in his palace had me hear their messages. So, we will cut this off here, I think, and the next section is basically the story of Sinuhe's return to Egypt, and there are different speeches and decrees, and so it becomes sort of epistolary after this point that we're at now. So anyway, we're about halfway through the tale of Sinuhe, so the great epic of Egypt, and so here we are. So I hope you're enjoying this, and that you will continue with us to the end of the story, which will be coming up soon. So thanks for watching, and we will be right back.